October 16, 1846. Imagine a room where silence is the most terrifying sound you can hear. You are in Boston. Seated on a steep, unforgiving wooden bench in an operating theater shaped like a Roman amphitheater. It's a room built for spectacle, for observation, for judgment. The light is pale, thin, and cold, falling from a huge domed skylight high above. It illuminates a million dancing dust motes and casts long shadows that climb the walls. They call this place the Ether Dome. Down on the floor, in the center of this Colosseum of science, a printer named Gilbert Abbott lies on a modified wooden chair. He has a vascular tumor on the left side of his neck, a pulsing knot of blood vessels that needs to be cut out. Every single person in this room, the frock-coated surgeons, the wide-eyed medical students, the curious onlookers, knows what the next few minutes are supposed to be. They should be a symphony of primal horror. They are expecting screams. Not just cries of pain, but the full-throated, soul-tearing shrieks of a conscious human being undergoing vivisection. They are expecting the desperate thrashing of a body at war with a blade, the taut strain of leather restraints against flesh, the metallic tang of fear in the air. But there are no screams. There is not even a whimper. There is only a strange, sweet smell that hangs in the air, a chemical perfume of overripe apples and laboratory spirits. And there is a sound. The gentle, rhythmic rise and fall of a man's chest. He's breathing. He is, impossibly, asleep. A surgeon, Dr. John Collins Warren, a stern man of 68, co-founder of this very hospital, leans into the cold light. His scalpel, a small, terrifying sliver of polished steel, flashes. He makes the incision. The room collectively holds its breath. Gilbert Abbott doesn't move. He doesn't flinch. The tumor is exposed, its vessels carefully tied off, and the mass is excised. It's all done in an atmosphere of profound, unsettling silence. Dr. Warren, a man who has built a legendary career on the blurring speed of his knife and the practiced deafness of his ears, straightens up. His work is done. He turns to the rows of stunned, skeptical faces watching from the benches, men who have seen and heard the very worst of what his profession entails. And he says 5 words that will detonate the old world and begin a new one. Gentlemen, this is no humbug. That day, in that room, under that dome of glass, humanity didn't just find a way to block pain. We stumbled upon something far more revolutionary, and infinitely more fragile. We invented a new form of trust. To understand the miracle of that silence, you first have to understand the universe of noise that preceded it. Before that day, surgery was not a science of healing. It was a brutal, high-speed trade measured in agonizing seconds and desperate screams. The operating room wasn't a sterile sanctuary. It was a place of last resort, a butcher's block you only climbed onto if the alternative was the absolute certainty of a slower, more agonizing death from disease or gangrene. The greatest surgeons weren't the most careful or the most precise. They were the fastest. They were men like Robert Liston, the fastest knife in the West End of London. Imagine his theater. No pristine white coats, no sterile drapes. Liston would stride in wearing his normal street clothes, perhaps pulling on a blood-stiffened apron over his frock coat. He'd pick a scalpel from a case and, as a flourish, might test its edge on his lapel or even his tongue. In his other hand, a crimson-stained knife held between his teeth. The floor would be covered in sawdust, a cheap, effective way to soak up the inevitable blood. Liston's performances were legendary. He could amputate a leg in under 30 seconds from the first cut to the final stitch. An assistant would hold a stopwatch. "Time me, gentlemen." He'd bellow. A flash of steel, the horrifyingly quick grate of a saw through bone, a limb tossed into a waiting bucket of sawdust. The speed was the point. Speed was mercy. The human body can only endure so much agony before it simply gives up. The nervous system floods, the heart fails. It was called surgical shock, and it could kill a patient just as surely as the blade itself. Liston's velocity was a race against this biological clock of torment. But this speed came at a cost. In his most infamous case, his blade moved so fast that he accidentally sliced off the fingers of his young assistant, who was holding the patient's leg. In his haste, he also slashed through the coattails of an elderly spectator who had leaned in too close for a better view. The spectator, believing he had been stabbed in a vital organ, dropped dead from fright on the spot. The patient and the assistant would later die of sepsis from infections contracted in the unclean theater. It remains, to this day, the only surgical operation in history with a 300% mortality rate. This wasn't sadism. This was the pinnacle of surgical care in the 1840s. Patients would be held down by strong assistants, or plied with enough alcohol or opium to render them semi-conscious, but nothing could truly stop the pain. In fact, pain was considered a vital diagnostic sign. A patient who screamed was a patient who was still alive. It was an essential, unavoidable part of the process. For millennia, this was the unwritten, unbreakable contract of surgery. You would trade a few minutes of unimaginable, life-altering torture for a slim chance to keep living. And all the while, the secret to silencing those screams, the key to a new world, was hiding in plain sight. It was a parlor trick. A party drug. The main attraction at laughing gas frolics enjoyed by the European aristocracy. To find the first whisper of this revolution, we have to turn the clock back almost half a century from the Ether Dome, to the year 1800. In Bristol, England, a brilliant, audacious young chemist named Humphrey Davy is conducting experiments at the Pneumatic Institution. His subject of fascination is a newly discovered gas, nitrous oxide. He and his friends, including poets like Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Robert Southey, inhale it from green silk bags. The effects are astonishing. A rush of euphoria. A profound sense of giddiness. Uncontrollable, booming laughter. They called it laughing gas. But Davy, ever the scientist, meticulously documents every sensation. He notes the euphoria, but also something else. Something profound. One evening, while high on the gas in his laboratory, he stumbles and gashes his leg open on a piece of furniture. It's a deep, nasty cut that should be intensely painful. But he feels nothing. The overwhelming wave of euphoria has completely erased the sensation of injury. In a flash of pure scientific insight, he grabs his journal and writes a sentence that, had the world been ready to listen, could have saved millions from surgical agony. He writes that nitrous oxide appears capable of destroying physical pain, and may probably be used with advantage during surgical operations. And then, nothing. The note is published in his respected treatise. The scientific community reads it. And the world collectively looks away. Why? Discovery isn't just about having an idea. It's about having an idea in the right context. To the medical establishment of 1800, Davy was a poet-scientist playing with laughing gas. He wasn't a surgeon. And his discovery was filed under amusement and recreation, not medicine. So, for 40 more agonizing years, surgeons kept cutting, and patients kept screaming, while the answer was literally being passed around at parties. And nitrous oxide wasn't the only chemical hiding in the wings. There was another, even older substance, sulfuric ether. A volatile, syrupy-smelling liquid first synthesized in the 16th century. Like nitrous, it gained popularity in the early 19th century as a recreational high. At ether frolics, common in American towns, young men and women would gather to dampen handkerchiefs with it and pass them around to get a short, dizzying, drunken-like high. Often, under the influence, a participant would fall or bump into furniture, only to wake up the next morning with a painful bruise and absolutely no memory of how they got it. Again, the clues were everywhere. The connection was just waiting to be made by someone with a problem to solve. In 1842, that person emerged. A quiet country doctor in Jefferson, Georgia, named Crawford Long. He had attended ether frolics in his youth and noticed their pain-dulling effects. On March 30, 1842, a patient named James Venable came to him with 2 small tumors on his neck, but was terrified of the pain of surgery. Dr. Long had an idea. He soaked a towel in ether, had Venable inhale until he was unconscious, and then swiftly excised one of the tumors. Venable awoke and swore he had felt nothing. Dr. Long had done it. Painless surgery. He was, by all accounts, the first. But he was a cautious, methodical man from a small town. He worried it was a fluke. He repeated the procedure several more times over the next few years on different patients, meticulously collecting his data, wanting to be absolutely certain before he announced his world-changing discovery to a skeptical medical establishment. He waited years to publish. And in the race for history, cautious waiting is the same as losing. History was waiting for a different kind of man. Someone with less caution. Someone with more ambition. Someone who was, perhaps, a little bit desperate. History was waiting for a dentist. His name was Horace Wells, a well-respected dentist from Hartford, Connecticut. And on December 10, 1844, his life changed forever. He attended a traveling science show, a public demonstration of the bizarre effects of laughing gas. The showman, Gardner Colton, invited volunteers from the audience to inhale the gas and make fools of themselves. A local man named Samuel Cooley volunteered, and after a deep inhalation from the gas bag, he began leaping around the stage in a euphoric frenzy. He stumbled off the stage, crashing into a wooden bench and tearing a huge, bloody gash in his leg. For anyone else, it was part of the chaotic entertainment. But for Wells, watching intently, it was a thunderbolt of revelation. Cooley sat down in a chair, bleeding profusely, yet laughing, a look of blissful unawareness on his face. He felt no pain at all. It was the same insight Davy had 44 years earlier, but this time, the context was everything. Wells wasn't just a curious chemist. He was a man who inflicted, and witnessed, immense pain every single day. The agonizing, intimate, bone-deep pain of a tooth being ripped from a living jaw. For Wells, this wasn't an amusement. It was a solution. The very next day, Wells put his theory to the ultimate test. He sat in his own dental chair, asked his friend John Riggs to prepare a tooth for extraction, and had the showman, Colton, administer nitrous oxide. As he drifted into euphoria, Riggs clamped a pair of forceps onto one of Wells' own rotten molars and pulled. Wells woke up moments later, his mouth bloody, a gap where the tooth had been. He had felt nothing. He turned to his friend, his eyes wide with discovery, and exclaimed, "A new era in tooth pulling." Wells was convinced he held the key to ending all surgical pain. Through a former student, he secured the ultimate stage, an invitation to demonstrate his technique at Massachusetts General Hospital, in the Ether Dome. In January 1845, he stood where John Collins Warren would stand less than 2 years later. He faced a packed room of the nation's most esteemed surgeons and brightest medical students. He explained his theory. He administered the gas to a patient, a medical student with a bad tooth. But something went terribly wrong. Perhaps in his nervousness, he pulled the breathing bag away too soon. Perhaps the dose wasn't sufficient for the student's constitution. As Wells clamped the forceps down and extracted the tooth, the patient let out a loud, unmistakable, agonizing cry of pain. The room erupted. Not with applause, but with jeers, laughter, and shouts of derision. Humbug. They cried. Fake. A sham. Horace Wells, a good man with a great idea, was publicly and utterly humiliated. He fled the room, his dream of a new era dying a spectacular death under that cold dome of glass. He would later descend into a spiral of depression and chloroform addiction, a tragic figure haunted by being so close to a truth nobody was yet ready to believe. But watching in the crowd that day was Wells' former student and business partner. A man with a very different temperament. His name was William T. G. Morton. Morton was ambitious, sharp, a relentless self-promoter. And he saw Wells' abject failure not as an endpoint, but as a critical data point. He saw the potential was real, but the execution was flawed. Maybe nitrous oxide was too weak, too unpredictable for deep surgical work. But the core idea, the idea of inhaled oblivion, that was gold. Morton began to experiment in secret. He consulted his former mentor, a brilliant but eccentric chemist named Charles T. Jackson, who suggested he try a more powerful chemical, purified sulfuric ether. Morton was off to the races. He tested it on his dog, on goldfish, on himself. In one terrifying incident, he rendered himself unconscious for several minutes after inhaling directly from a bottle in his study. But he was relentless. He perfected the dosage. On September 30, 1846, a musician named Eben Frost came to Morton's dental office, terrified of having a tooth pulled. Morton offered him an alternative. He soaked a handkerchief in his ether, held it to Frost's face, and told him to breathe deeply. Frost drifted away into a dreamless state. Morton extracted the tooth. When Frost woke up, disoriented, he asked when the procedure was going to begin. Morton held up the bloody tooth. Frost swore he felt nothing. This was it. The real thing. But Morton was a shrewder operator than Wells. He knew from Wells' failure that a simple demonstration wasn't enough. He needed spectacle. He needed an airtight, undeniable success on the grandest possible stage. And he needed a prop. He needed something that looked medical, scientific, and proprietary. He commissioned a local instrument maker to build a custom glass inhaler. A globe with two openings, one for a mouthpiece, one to allow air to mix with the fumes from an ether-soaked sponge inside. It was a brilliant piece of stagecraft. Armed with his apparatus and his powerful secret, he used his connections to arrange for one more demonstration at Massachusetts General Hospital. In the very same room. In front of the very same audience that had scorned his partner. This time, he would not fail. October 16, 1846. William Morton stands in the ether dome. He arrives late, flustered, having made last-minute adjustments to his inhaler. The surgeons are impatient. Dr. Warren is ready to begin the old-fashioned way, scalpel in hand. As Dr. Morton has not arrived, he says to the gallery, "I presume he is otherwise engaged." At that moment, Morton rushes in. He is calm under pressure. He places the glass globe to Gilbert Abbott's lips. The patient breathes in. The seconds tick by. The room is thick with skepticism. And then, the world changes. The surgery is completed in profound, unnerving silence. When Dr. Warren speaks his famous words, "Gentlemen, this is no humbug," it isn't the end of the story. It's the fuse being lit on a new, far more complicated, and far more human one. Almost immediately, the war began. A bitter, vicious, soul-crushing war over who deserved the credit, the fame, and crucially, the money. Morton, a businessman as much as a dentist, had no intention of giving his discovery away for free. In a move of staggering audacity, he tried to disguise the common chemical, adding aromatic oils to hide its distinctive smell and patenting it under the name Letheon, a name drawn from the river Lethe in Greek mythology, the river of forgetfulness and oblivion. He wanted to own pain relief. He envisioned a future where every surgeon would pay him a licensing fee to use his patented secret gas. The medical community was universally outraged. The idea of patenting mercy, of putting a price tag on the end of agony, felt like a profound ethical violation. A surgeon in Boston who received a sample sniffed it and immediately saw through the ruse. "Smells a hell of a lot like ether to me," he grumbled. The secret was out. Then Charles T. Jackson, Morton's former mentor, erupted onto the scene. He claimed that he was the one who first suggested purified ether to Morton, that Morton was merely his technician, the hands that carried out his intellectual discovery. The two men, once collaborators, became sworn enemies, locked in a public and legal battle that would consume the rest of their lives. They wrote scathing pamphlets about each other. They lobbied Congress for a national prize of $100,000, each claiming sole right to the reward. The ghost of Horace Wells was resurrected, his supporters claiming he was the true discoverer of anesthesia with his nitrous oxide work. And far away in Georgia, the modest Crawford Long finally published his own accounts of his 1842 surgeries, entering the fray as a fourth claimant. These four men became locked in a tragic opera of ambition and ego that would destroy them all. None would find the fortune or the peace they craved. Meanwhile, the genie they had unleashed could not be put back in the bottle. News of the discovery traveled by ship and telegraph, exploding across the globe. In Edinburgh, Scotland, a pioneering obstetrician named James Young Simpson read about ether and immediately began experimenting to see if it could ease the pains of childbirth. He found ether to be effective but irritating to the lungs. He searched for a better alternative and discovered a new chemical, chloroform. It was faster acting than ether, had a more pleasant smell, and was less of a fire hazard. But it had a dark side. Chloroform was dangerously toxic to the heart, capable of causing sudden cardiac arrest, killing a perfectly healthy patient without any warning. Despite the risks, it found the ultimate public relations victory. In 1853, Queen Victoria was giving birth to her eighth child, Prince Leopold. Her physician, the brilliant epidemiologist John Snow, carefully administered chloroform to her during labor. The birth was smooth, and the Queen was reportedly delighted. She used it again for her ninth birth. Suddenly, anesthesia wasn't just a controversial medical tool, it was royally approved. Legitimate. Public opinion, especially in Britain, flipped. What was once seen by some as an unnatural and sinful interference with God's plan was now seen as a gift of modern science, a symbol of progress. Before 1846, what was the most important thing you had to trust your surgeon with? Their knife. Their speed. Their brute strength. After 1846, the entire architecture of medical trust was re-engineered. Because now, you had to trust them with your consciousness itself. Pause and think about that for a moment. What does it actually feel like to grant someone permission to turn you off? To voluntarily surrender your awareness, your will, your very self, and become a helpless, absent body, while they work on you with sharp instruments. It is perhaps the most profound act of faith and vulnerability in modern life. This new, radical form of trust required a new kind of specialist. As surgery, freed from the constraints of speed, became slower, more meticulous, more complex, more invasive, delving deeper and deeper into the body's cavities, someone needed to manage the fragile state of unconsciousness. Someone had to stand constant watch over the razor-thin boundary between surgical oblivion and permanent death. This was the birth of a new profession, the anesthesiologist. The guardian of your breath. The silent, vigilant hero in the operating room whose entire job is to keep you stable in an artificial, precarious state of non-existence, so the surgeon can focus on the intricate work of repair. Pain was gone, but so was the body's primary alarm system. We had turned off the signal. And so, we were forced to invent new ones. We traded the raw, human data of screams for the cool, abstract data of machines. At first, the early anesthetist monitored by hand and by eye. A finger on the pulse to feel its rate and rhythm. Watching the color of a patient's lips and earlobes for the bluish tint of cyanosis. Observing the rise and fall of their chest, even leaning in to feel the breath on their cheek. It was an art as much as a science. But slowly, technology began to provide a new language of safety. The metronomic beep of the electrocardiogram, tracing the electrical life of the heart. The measure of carbon dioxide in every single exhaled breath, confirming the connection between lungs and blood. And then, in the 1980s, the single biggest leap forward in patient safety since anesthesia itself, the pulse oximeter. That little red glowing clip on your finger that gives a continuous, real-time reading of the oxygen saturation in your blood. With its widespread adoption, anesthesia-related mortality plummeted dramatically. The steady, reassuring, rhythmic beep of the pulse oximeter became the new sound of safety. It became the soundtrack of trust. Today, you and I live inside the quiet that was born in the ether dome that morning in 1846. Every time you get a filling at the dentist and feel the blessed, numb relief of Novocaine, you are living in its legacy. Every time a woman receives an epidural to ease the pains of childbirth, she is living in its legacy. Every preoperative checklist, every consent form you sign, every beep and we're from a machine in a hospital room is a direct echo of that day we decided, as a species, that extreme pain was no longer a biological requirement. We learned to pause agony. And in that great, silent pause, we reinvented what it means to heal, what it means to be a doctor, and what it means to be a patient. The original glass inhaler now sits behind glass in a museum, under soft, reverent lights. It's a simple object. A glass globe and a sponge. But it's so much more than that. It's a promise. A covenant. The fragile, beautiful, and world-altering evidence of the day we learned to turn off pain, and in doing so, turned on the full, incandescent potential of modern medicine. If this journey into the archives of humanity fascinated you, there's another story that changed everything waiting for you right here on the end screen. It's a deep dive into an object you've seen 1,000 times, but never truly understood. And for more deep dives delivered to you every single day, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what we unbox next. Finally, a question for the comments, and I truly want to know what you think. In your opinion, what is the single most important invention in all of modern medicine? Anesthesia, antibiotics, vaccines, sanitation. Let's discuss. Thank you for watching.